People often think tragedy only strikes when a loved one dies. But for me, everything began after my husband closed his eyes for the last time. On the very night of the funeral, my husband's stepson looked at me as if I were a stranger. And just 2 days later, they threw my luggage out of the very house I had lived in for more than 30 years. I, a 64-year-old woman who had just lost her husband, was tossed onto the street like something useless. No compassion, no genuine tears. And the reason was wrapped in a single sentence they flung at my face. This property doesn't belong to you. But what they didn't know was this. I am not the kind of woman who grows old in humiliation. Betrayed, cast out of the place I once called home, I chose to rise. In this story, I will tell you how a 64-year-old widow flipped the entire game, uncovered secrets about a missing will, swapped medication, and how I reclaimed everything they thought I was unworthy of. If you want to know how far a mother can go for revenge, then keep listening. This story is only just beginning. I always thought that at 64, the greatest pain of my life would be watching my life partner slip away. But it turned out, my husband's death was only the door that opened into a deeper abyss. The day he died, the sky poured a cold, biting rain. I stood beside the casket, my trembling hand brushing the white cloth covering the face of the man who had walked with me through more than 30 years of life. I had prepared myself for the separation, but I had never prepared for what came right after. Throughout the funeral, I noticed Randall and Veronica, my husband's son and his wife, showing not even a trace of grief. Their eyes never rested on their father. Instead, they scanned the house, every object, every painting on the wall, every cabinet. That look, it was not the look of mourning. It was the look of someone appraising property. I wanted to believe I was being overly sensitive, but the intuition of a woman who has spent her whole life in silence and observation told me something was very wrong. When the funeral ended and the guests had left, the house sank into a dim, unsettling quiet. I stood alone in the living room, exhausted but steady, trying to hold on to the faint warmth my husband had left behind. Then I heard the sharp click of high heels on the wooden step. Veronica stood behind me, her dark red lips curling into a smile I couldn't read. She stepped closer, her sweet, heavy perfume flooding the air. Then, in a voice soft as silk but cold as a blade, she whispered, "From now on, you have no say in this house." A sentence light as the wind, yet tight enough to squeeze my heart. I turned to her, but Veronica didn't look away. She stared straight into me, as if declaring her power openly. In that moment, I understood. From the second my husband drew his last breath, my place in this house died with him. That night, I lay in the bedroom that had once been my haven, but sleep never came. Veronica's words echoed, repeating like a curse. I remembered the recent days when my husband had nervously mentioned that his medication smelled strange. The times he grew tired unusually fast, and the look in Randall's eyes whenever he entered his father's room, sharp, unreadable. Suddenly, all the small, scattered fragments rushed back, forming a dark intuition. My husband's death. Was it truly natural? Or was it merely the first step in a plan I had not been allowed to see? I lay there, staring at the pitch-black ceiling, listening to the wind whistle through the window frame. Everything familiar suddenly felt foreign, as if I were lying in someone else's home. In that darkness, I knew my life had stepped into a shadowed realm I had never known. A realm where I, a seemingly fragile 64-year-old woman, would have to choose, to endure or to resist. And I had no idea what awaited me ahead. Only one thing was certain. Peace had left this house with my husband. And from that day on, I was no longer the gentle woman they thought they could dismiss. The darkness had called my name, and I answered. 2 days after the funeral, the grief of losing my husband had not even begun to fade. I still placed his teacup on the table out of habit, a habit carried through 30 years. I still found my eyes drifting toward his favorite chair, the one where he sat each morning to read the newspaper. The house was so quiet I could hear every tick of the clock, each beat like a needle reminding me that from now on, I was completely alone. I thought they would leave me in peace for a few days, at least a few days, just to breathe. But I had been far too naive. That afternoon, I heard something heavy slam onto the front porch. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was not the gray sky or the cutting wind, but my own suitcase lying on the tiled floor. My clothes were scattered everywhere like cheap, unwanted things. Randall stood a few steps away. His eyes did not avoid mine. In fact, there was a flicker of impatience in them, like someone annoyed by a late delivery. My voice trembled, barely more than a breath. "Randall, what are you doing?" He clicked his tongue, as if my question was nothing but an inconvenience. And then he said the sentence that tore apart the last shred of humanity in him. "Just leave. This house doesn't belong to you." That was it. No explanation, no sympathy, not even a trace of respect for the woman who had cared for his father until the very last moment. I looked around the front yard. This used to be the garden where I planted every flower, every tree according to my husband's wishes. For so many springs, I had knelt in the soil, watering and pruning so he could see greenery each time he opened the door. And now, I was standing here like a stranger, being expelled from the very home I had tended for half my life. The night wind lashed my face, icy and sharp. But colder still was the emptiness in their eyes. I steadied my voice. "This is your father's and my home. I'm not going anywhere." Veronica stepped out from behind Randall, arms crossed, her red lips curling into a half smile full of annoyance. "Your time here is over. The dead leave, the living take over. You understand?" I looked at the warm yellow light shining through the living room window, the same place where, only the night before, I had lit incense for my husband. Not even 48 hours after his death, his son and daughter-in-law wanted to erase me from this house as easily as one wipes away dust. No one called my name. No one asked where I would go. No one offered me a coat, though the cold cut straight through the skin. They just wanted me gone, as far away as possible. Randall nudged the suitcase closer to my feet with the tip of his shoe. "You have no right to stay here. Don't make me repeat myself." I stood frozen. My whole body shook. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from the raw cruelty staring back at me. I had cared for their father through every painful day, stayed awake on countless nights when he struggled to breathe, cooked every bowl of soup, wiped every bead of sweat. I thought they would at least have a trace of human decency. But the moment my husband closed his eyes, they no longer saw me as a person. A 64-year-old woman shoved out into the cold night simply because they wanted this house free of any obstacle. I lifted the suitcase, each step away from the porch heavy and slow. Every step felt like I was walking across the years I had lived and sacrificed here. Every step was another cut to the heart. At the gate, I turned back for one last look at the house. The light glowed through the window, casting shadows of Randall and Veronica as they slammed the door shut, as if closing the final door to my old life. My heart shattered, but within that pain, another feeling began to rise, faint but sharp. The feeling of someone pushed to the absolute edge, the feeling of someone stripped of everything. I didn't know what my future would be, But that night, standing beneath the freezing sky, I understood one truth. They thought they had gotten rid of me, but they had just created an enemy they would spend a lifetime paying for. I walked away from that house, not as a defeated woman, but as a storm just beginning to form. I left the house on that freezing night, but only a few hours later, another door unexpectedly opened. Just as dawn broke, I received a call from Harold, my husband's longtime attorney and the friend who had stood by him for more than 40 years. His voice dropped when he heard how Randall and Veronica had thrown me out of the house. He said only one thing: "We need to meet, immediately." I knew Harold was not the kind of man who panicked easily. His urgency weighed heavily on my chest, as if another storm was approaching, one I couldn't yet see. We met at a small cafe at the end of the street. When Harold walked in, his eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his silver hair was more disheveled than usual. He didn't ask whether I was all right. He simply pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed a thin file in front of me, though his expression carried a heaviness I had never seen. "I've rechecked all the documents, and there's something you need to know," Harold said. My hands tightened together. "What is it, Harold?" He exhaled, opened the file, and slid it toward me. "Edward's final will has disappeared from the system." I thought I had heard him wrong. "Disappeared? What do you mean?" Harold nodded, his voice grave. "It's not in the digital archives, not in the storage safe. Even the copy I kept separately is gone." I sat still, frozen. A cold sensation crept along my spine. The property, the house, the land, the inheritance, everything was detailed in that will. And it had vanished completely? Harold continued, each word hitting me like a blow. "Edward updated his will just 3 months before he passed. He wanted to ensure you had full ownership of the house and joint assets. Randall was not to control anything." My breath caught. My heart pounded. I knew my husband cared deeply for me, but I never imagined he had been this deliberate, this protective. Hallow looked straight at me, suspicion darkening his eyes. I traced the access log. Only one person entered the archive account before I discovered the will was missing. I almost didn't want to hear the name, but Harold spoke it anyway, each syllable heavy as a verdict. Randall. The room seemed to tighten around us. The clink of a spoon hitting a coffee cup cut the air like metal striking metal. I twisted the worn wedding ring on my finger. My husband had trusted Randall. He had tried countless times to bridge the distance between father and son, even though Randall had never truly accepted me as family. But never, not once, had I imagined he would go this far. My voice rasped. "Harold, are you certain?" "I'm certain. I checked 3 times. No one but Randall had access to the system using the password Edward left behind. My husband's password would never end up in someone's hands by accident, unless he had trusted the wrong person. Or someone had taken advantage of him when he was already weak. I remembered those last nights. Randall was always the one bringing him his medication. I remembered my husband's uneasy voice saying the medicine smelled different. I remembered the sudden fatigue, the unexplained spells of unconsciousness. All the fragments of memory stabbed into me at once. I trembled, not from fear alone, but from a rising fury burning through my chest. Harold placed a hand on the table. "You should prepare yourself. The missing will is only the tip of the iceberg. I don't believe any of this is accidental." I lifted my eyes to his. "You're saying Edward's death?" Harold didn't answer, but the look in his eyes, the look of someone who had seen too many cases, too many hidden sins, said everything. There was something far darker beneath it all. I lowered my head, clenching my hands so tightly my nails nearly broke the skin. And at that moment, I understood. Randall didn't just want the assets. He wanted to erase me from my husband's life, erase me from that house, and now erase the truth itself. I left the cafe with heavy steps. The sky had turned gray again, the cold wind blowing like whispers of the past. I knew I was standing at the edge of a deep, hidden abyss, a place where every truth I uncovered might break my heart all over again. But I knew something else too. I would not let them bury my husband along with the truth. An instinct surged inside me, the first flame of a coming storm of revenge. I wasn't just stripped of my home. I wasn't just robbed of my rights. I was stepping into a battle against people who were willing to do anything, even erase the traces of their own sins. And I would unearth every secret they tried to bury, whether they wanted it or not. After leaving the cafe with Harold, I returned to the small room he had helped me rent temporarily. It held only a single bed, an old table, and a dim yellow lamp, yet it still felt warmer than the house Randall had thrown me out of. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as Harold's words echoed in my mind. The will had vanished. Randall was the last to access it. All of it drilled into my thoughts like a relentless blade. But then another memory, sharper, more terrifying, surfaced. A memory from my husband's final days. I remembered it vividly. One evening, he looked at me with weary eyes, forcing a faint smile. He picked up his pill bottle, frowned, and whispered, "Mary, this medicine smells strange, not like before." At the time, I thought he was just old, weak, and his senses were dulling. I smiled and told him not to worry, that I would check it later. But I never got the chance, because the moment he finished speaking, Randall appeared at the bedroom door, a flicker of irritation crossing his face as if afraid his father might say too much. "I already got Dad's medication. Don't bother Mom anymore. I'll take care of it." I remembered the unease tightening in my chest as Randall snatched the bottle from his father's hand and gently pushed me out of the room. "You should rest. You're tired." At the time, I foolishly thought he was being considerate. Now, the memory chilled my blood. That night, when Harold brought me the medication records, it felt as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. He placed the papers in front of me, his voice weighed down. "These are the medications Edward was supposed to be taking. But this is the bottle I collected from his room yesterday. They don't match, Mary." I held the two lists in my hands, my eyes refusing to accept what they saw. Not only different names, different dosages, different types entirely. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never requested a change in his medication." Harold looked at me, his voice slow and gentle, as though afraid a wrong word might shatter me. The doctor confirmed Edward switched to this new medication about 2 weeks before he passed. But the authorization form doesn't have your signature. A cold surge shot through my spine. 2 weeks. Exactly 2 weeks before the strange symptoms began. The dizziness, the disorientation, the constant fatigue, the sudden drowsiness that stole his clarity. I had assumed his illness was worsening, but now everything looked horrifyingly different. My hands shook, the papers crumpling under my grip. Only one person cared for him during those final days. Only one person handled his medication every single day. Only one person insisted on taking care of it when I was exhausted. Randall. I never wanted to believe a child could harm his own father. But the truth doesn't depend on my willingness. It exists, cold, unyielding, merciless. I remember the last clear moment before my husband collapsed. That night, he held my hand tightly, his eyes wide with fear. "Mary, the medicine, it's wrong." But he never finished his sentence, because Randall stepped into the room, placed a hand on his father's shoulder, and told me to go call the doctor. And that was the last time I heard my husband's voice fully lucid. I buried my head in my hands, struggling to breathe, my chest crushed beneath an invisible weight. Every memory came back distorted, nightmarish, and yet, for the first time, they fit together with perfect, terrifying clarity. Harold rested a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "Mary, I think you understand what we're dealing with." I nodded, tears slipping down, not from weakness, but from the fire swelling inside me. My husband did not die naturally. I rose to my feet, inhaling deeply. My legs still trembled, but my mind had transformed completely. The fear, the helplessness of the woman cast out of her home, all of it was gone. Something else had taken its place. Cold, precise, razor sharp. I looked at Harold, my voice steady and low. "I will find the truth, no matter how brutal it is." "And I will help you," Harold replied without a second of hesitation. I stepped outside. The wind hit my face, bitter and piercing, yet still not as cold as the truth I had just uncovered. The sky was the color of ash, but inside me, a fire had been lit. A fire Randall and Veronica would never extinguish. Because at that moment, I understood. I had not only lost my husband, I had lost him to those who didn't deserve to be called family. And I, a 64-year-old woman cast into the darkness, had officially begun my journey to drag the light back into my life. No matter how many dark secrets I had to walk through, no matter how many truths threatened to break my heart again, I would not stop. Not when my husband died in injustice. Not when the truth was twisted. Not when the guilty lived comfortably atop my suffering. That was the moment I knew. My husband's death was no accident. And now, I no longer feared the darkness. I had become the very darkness they would have to face. That night, after leaving the hospital with the first pieces of evidence showing my husband's medication had been switched, I walked down the empty street, feeling as though every sound around me had blurred. Cars passed by, wind howled past my ears, but in my mind, there was only one question. Why? Why would Randall do such a thing to his own father? Why would Veronica be complicit? Why could their cruelty run deep enough to reach a level most people couldn't even imagine? I stood beneath the street lamp, my hand trembling as the image of my husband's face in his final days returned to me. Pale, exhausted, his eyes clinging to mine as though begging me to hold on to what little life he had left. I was right there, yet I failed to protect him. Failed to see what he had tried to warn me about before the chance slipped away. That regret cut deeper than any blade. It burned in my chest, turning into a fury I never knew I was capable of feeling. I am 64. My hair is nearly white. My hands are not as steady as they once were. People would look at me and see only a fragile old woman, someone easy to push aside, easy to forget. But they, Randall and Veronica, made a grave mistake. They thought I would accept my fate. They thought I would remain silent. They thought I would grow old in fear, in poverty, in grief after losing my husband and losing the home I once tended with love. I sat on a stone bench in the park, watching dry leaves fall before me. Each leaf hitting the ground felt like a reminder. Life, too, eventually falls. But I was still standing. I had not fallen. I felt my body tremble, not from the cold, but from the blaze of anger rising in each breath. I had lost everything. But in the very moment of that loss, I rediscovered myself. I was no longer the gentle, patient woman who spent half her life caring for husband and children. No longer the stepmother Randall dismissed. No longer the old woman easy to manipulate. No longer the fragile figure in Veronica's eyes. I had become something they never expected. A woman ready to fight to the very end. I looked up at the pitch-black sky. The night wind carried its cold bite, but inside me, the heat had risen enough to burn through despair itself. When I thought of my husband, the man who loved me, protected me, believed in me, I knew I could not let go. I could not let his death be wrapped in lies. Could not let Randall and Veronica enjoy comfort built on betrayal. Could not let them erase the will, the property, the dignity, and the life of the man I loved. I inhaled deeply and stood up. In the darkness, I spoke words I had never imagined I would say, but they flowed out of me like a vow forged in fire. You took everything from me. Now it's my turn to take everything back. The sound was soft, but it carried a power that made my entire being shift. I no longer trembled, no longer feared, no longer saw myself as the woman thrown out of her home like something disposable. I knew my purpose now, and I would follow it to the end. I called Harold. His voice startled when he heard the calm, sharpened tone that emerged from me. Harold, we're going to begin for real. Mary, are you certain? This path will be difficult. Difficult? Randall and Veronica have no idea how far I am willing to go. On the other end, Harold was silent for a few seconds, perhaps to measure the determination in my voice. Then he said, "Then we will turn over every stone, every document, every line in the records. Randall lit this fire. I will show him what it means to be burned." I hung up, gripping the phone tightly in my hand. I'm 64, but for the first time in my life, I felt stronger than ever. Betrayal can make someone suffer. Being stripped of everything can break someone. But push a person too far, past the limits they never knew they had, and they become something their enemies never see coming. I stared down the long, dark road ahead, the wind howling like the entrance to a deep abyss. I wasn't turning back anymore. From that moment on, I walked not as the woman who'd been cast out of her home, but as someone returning to reclaim justice, to reclaim dignity, to reclaim my home, to reclaim my husband, and to reclaim myself. My war had begun, and I would not stop until Randall and Veronica understood one thing. You should never push a mother, a wife, a widow to the edge, because that is the moment she becomes the storm. The resolve for revenge felt like new blood running through my veins. Ever since that night in the park, I knew I couldn't rely on emotions alone. I needed truth, evidence, and more than anything, I needed to understand the two people who had destroyed my life. Harold agreed to help me, but he also said one thing plainly. Mary, to defeat Randall and Veronica, you must know their past. Know what they've done, who they've harmed. I nodded. I understood. To expose evil, one must trace the footprints it leaves behind. In the days that followed, I began a journey I never imagined I could take at the age of 64. Harold provided a list of individuals who had done business with Randall and Veronica, those who once worked with them, those who had fallen into disputes with them. The list was longer than I expected, and every name held an ugly story. The first person I visited was the owner of an auto repair shop who had gone bankrupt 2 years earlier. When I mentioned Randall's name, his weary eyes flared with anger. That man? He borrowed money from me to invest, papers signed and everything. Then he vanished. When I sued, he brought in lawyers who forced me to surrender. My shop was my 30-year heart and soul. His voice choked. He laughed in my face when I signed the bankruptcy papers. Do you understand? He laughed. I clenched my fist. It wasn't just me. Randall had left a trail of ruin behind him. The next person was a former employee from my husband's company, a woman who had worked there more than a decade but had been framed by Veronica. I refused to sign a falsified document she shoved in front of me. The next day, I was accused of fraud and fired. Veronica is cold, cruel. There's not a heartbeat in that woman. I asked her, "Do you think they could harm even family?" She let out a bitter, hollow laugh. With those two, there are no limits. A chill swept through me. All those years living under the same roof, yet I had never truly known who they were. Or maybe I had simply convinced myself they couldn't possibly be that evil. Looking back now, I saw just how blind I had been. But the person who shook me the most was a woman named Eleanor, once Veronica's closest friend. It had taken Harold a great deal of effort to find her address. When Eleanor opened the door, she looked frightened, as though terrified that the past had come knocking. She only relaxed after I introduced myself and told her I was searching for the truth. We sat in her small living room. The light fell across her gaunt face. Veronica is dangerous. You know that? Eleanor said, her voice low but sharp. She's not just greedy. She's the type who will crush anyone in her way, even those she once called friends. Did she hurt you? I asked. Eleanor let out a laugh, bitter, broken, the kind that makes your spine go cold. She destroyed nearly everything. My job, my reputation, years of my life. She framed me in a scandal I had nothing to do with, all because I knew too much about her schemes. I fell silent. The more I listened, the colder my feet felt. The pair I had dismissed as merely disrespectful children were in fact manipulative, ruthless, and reckless beyond belief. Eleanor stared at me for a long moment before asking a question that made me pause. Why did you come to find me? I lifted my head, meeting the eyes of a woman who, like me, carried deep wounds. I'm searching for any signs connected to my husband's death. I believe they didn't just steal my assets. There's something far darker. Eleanor wasn't surprised. She simply nodded, as though she had expected it. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a razor-thin whisper. If you want to take them down, I'm coming with you. Her words struck like lightning through a stormy sky. I looked at her and saw not only pain, but a hatred buried too long. My heartbeat quickened, not out of fear, but because for the first time since my husband died, I was no longer alone. Eleanor placed her hand over mine, gripping gently. Veronica ruined my life once. Randall took everything I built. If you want to fight them, I'll show you things only Veronica's closest friend would know. I swallowed my shock, squeezing her hand in return. I didn't just have Harold. I didn't just have determination. Now I had an ally, someone who knew them better than I ever did. In that moment, one truth became clear. Randall and Veronica had harmed too many people, too cruelly. And now, everything they buried would be unearthed, layer by layer. I stood, taking a deep breath, feeling the fire inside me burn stronger than ever. I was no longer the woman shoved into the darkness. I was stepping into the darkness. But this time, to drag every secret into the light. Randall and Veronica thought they were invisible, but they didn't realize the people they had shattered were the perfect pieces leading me to the truth. And I, the 64-year-old mother thrown out of her own home, would use every one of those pieces to forge a weapon for my vengeance. A battle that, for the first time, I wasn't fighting only for my husband, but for everyone they had ever harmed. Because from this moment on, I would not sit quietly and let the darkness swallow me. I would be the one dragging it out of its lair. My investigation with Eleanor had only just begun, yet the fragments we collected had already painted a picture far more terrifying than I imagined. Randall and Veronica weren't merely cruel. They had a past filled with victims, with broken lives, with countless names crushed beneath their greedy footsteps. But what kept me awake at night was the feeling that something even bigger was waiting for me. A final piece. A truth Randall was willing to bury at any cost. And it all began with the broken camera in my house, the one Harold hadn't had time to inspect yet. That afternoon, Harold called. "Mary, I found the backup storage device. I had to dig through the old archives at Edward's law office to locate it." Randall marked it as damaged and sealed it with tape. My heart tightened. Was it really broken, or did someone want it to be? Harold stayed silent for a moment. I think we both know the answer. He took the device to the best technician he knew. By evening, he sent me a message. "Come to my office tonight. There's something you need to see." My heart pounded, with dread and with need. Need to face the very thing that could break me all over again, but also the thing I could not walk away from. When I arrived at Harold's office, night had already fallen. The yellow light cast long shadows across the shelves lined with old files, the same place I used to see my husband sit, reviewing documents with quiet patience. Now I stood there alone. Harold sat before his computer, eyes tired yet sharpened with vigilance. He turned when he heard the door open. "Mary, we recovered the footage. Not all of it, but enough for you to understand what happened." I swallowed and stepped closer to the screen. The footage flickered for a moment, then sharpened. It was the living room camera, from the days when my husband was still alive. I saw Randall standing beside the table. He was holding a small paper pharmacy bag, the kind hospitals use for prescription medicine. Veronica stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with impatience. It felt as though the air around me turned to ice. Harold scrubbed the video forward. Randall pulled out a new pill bottle, the label green, unfamiliar, something I had never seen in my home. He held it up, smirking. A smirk so cold it made my skin crawl, and said, "Just a few more days." I went numb. Veronica stepped closer, peered at the bottle, then asked, "Does she suspect anything?" Randall scoffed. "That old woman just cries and fusses over my dad. Let her think he's getting sicker. After that, everything will fall into place." My legs gave out. I collapsed into a chair. I couldn't breathe. My eyes stung. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped my heart out. Harold turned toward me, his voice thick with sorrow. "Mary, I'm so sorry, but you needed to see this." I stared at the screen, each frame slicing deeper into my memory. My husband saying the medicine smelled different. His sudden exhaustion. Randall pushing me out of the room so he could take care of him. And now, I knew why. My husband's own children stood in the living room, just steps from the bedroom where he struggled to breathe, and discussed how to push him through death's door. I began trembling, not from fear, from fury so deep it numbed my entire body. My voice came out sounding like it belonged to someone else. "Harold, put on the rest." He nodded. The footage jumped ahead. The image flickered, but I could still see Randall slip the new pill bottle into his jacket pocket. Just before leaving the frame, he turned to Veronica and muttered, "When it's all over, we'll throw her out. The sooner, the better." My blood froze. I felt my heartbeat pounding painfully, each beat a stab. A pain that couldn't be cried out, couldn't be screamed out. It only spread into a rage as deep as the bottom of an abyss. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder, trying to steady me, but I was beyond shaking now. I wiped my tears and stood. Each breath burned hot as fire in my chest. "Harold?" My voice was low, but iron hard. "I will not let them escape this." Harold looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something like respect mixed with awe. "I know, and I'll stand with you. We're seeing this through to the end." I turned back to the screen one last time, staring at Randall and Veronica as they plotted the death of the man I loved more than anything. Those few seconds had changed everything. I was no longer afraid of the dark, no longer afraid of the truth, no longer the fragile woman thrown out of her home. I had seen the true faces of my enemies, and now I would show them mine. A 64-year-old widow, but the last person they should have crossed. After leaving Harold's office, my steps no longer trembled the way they once did. I walked like someone carrying a truth capable of burning Randall and Veronica's entire world to ashes. The night wind swept across my silver hair, but I didn't feel cold. Inside my chest was a fire lit by my husband's suffering, by the betrayal of two people I once tried to treat as family. I was no longer the hunted. I had become the hunter. And that night, I returned to the gate of the house they had stolen from me. The porch light was still the same warm yellow, but I knew the truth. Inside that house, two people were sleeping on a crime they believed no one had uncovered. I stood silently before the cold iron gate, my fingers brushing the familiar metal bars. This used to be my home, the place where my husband lived, laughed, where he played his guitar on slow afternoons. Now, it was the lair of those who murdered him. I took a slow breath and pressed the doorbell. The sharp ding-dong echoed through the night, a small sound, but enough to awaken the souls of those living in sin. I waited. A few seconds later, the door swung open. Veronica stood there. She wore a white silk robe, mascara smudged, clearly just awakened from sleep. But the moment her eyes landed on me, her face drained of color. White, as if she'd seen a ghost. And perhaps in her eyes, I truly was. A ghost rising from the truth she tried to bury. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence squeeze her heart. Veronica stammered, Why are you here?" I stepped forward, the porch light illuminating my face. No fear, no fragility, only a calmness sharp enough to cut. I looked straight into her eyes and spoke slowly, each word like the edge of a sharpened blade. "I know what you two did to my husband." She jolted as if someone had struck her. Her red lips trembled, her eyes widening so much they looked ready to tear at the corners. She swallowed hard, failing. I saw it clearly, down to the tiny veins on her skin, the panic I had waited so long to see. "You're crazy. You're making things up." Veronica tried to sound strong, but her voice cracked like shattered glass. I didn't step inside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rage. I simply stood there, calm, like someone who had walked through death and come back. I saw the camera footage. I heard Randall say, "Just a few more days." I know you switched Edward's medication. I know the inheritance, the will, all of it was part of your plan. Veronica stumbled backward. A tear rolled down her cheek, not from guilt, from fear. For the first time in her life, she feared me, and it was sweeter than any victory. I stepped closer, my voice low enough for only the two of us. Do you know what hurts me the most? Not the house, not the money, but the way you watched me cry at my husband's funeral and still calmly carried out your plan. She trembled harder, stepping back again. Her legs looked so weak she might collapse if I moved 1 inch closer. Just then, the living room lights snapped on. Randall appeared on the stairs, scowling from being awakened. "Who is it, Veronica? It's late." But when he saw me, the rest of his sentence died in his throat. His face changed color like an animal spotting the hunter. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. I smiled, a slow, chilling smile that startled even me. Don't call me Mom anymore. I don't have a son who poisons his own father. Randall's grip tightened on the banister, the veins on his hands bulging. He tried to steady his voice. "You're listening to nonsense. That's not—" "Stop lying," I cut him off, calm as ever. "I saw the camera footage." Randall froze. His entire body stiffened. The way he swallowed, dry, shallow, told me he was panicking so hard he could barely breathe. I didn't need to scream. Didn't need to present evidence. Didn't need to argue. I spoke one sentence that silenced them both. "I will make you pay for the rest of your lives." Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Don't worry. I won't break in. I won't fight. I won't do anything illegal. I'll do it the civilized way, the way you two will never escape." Then I turned my back and walked away, not like the woman they had once thrown out, but like the rightful owner of the house, returning to declare war. Behind me, I heard the door slam shut, hurried footsteps, Veronica's muffled sobs, and Randall's panicked curses. They were rattled. They were afraid. I smiled, because finally, the starting point of my suffering was behind me. And now, I stood at the starting point of my revenge. The darkness surrounded me, but I felt no fear, because this time, I was the darkness they would have to face. Leaving that house that night, I didn't hurry. I walked slowly, as if each step carved my declaration of war into the ground, a warning Randall and Veronica would soon understand. But to destroy people like them, anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed them to tear each other apart, from the inside, and I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, before the sun even rose, I sent Randall a message with part of the camera footage Harold had restored. Not the whole thing, just the section where Randall handed the pill bottle to Veronica, along with his chilling words, "Just a few more days." I added a short message. "This is only part of the truth. Find the rest yourself." I didn't send it to Veronica. I sent it to Randall, because I knew what kind of man he was. Weak-spirited, easily frightened, easily driven into paranoia. A single spark could make him burn down his own house. Not even 10 minutes later, Randall called. His voice was shaking, strangled with fear. "Where did you get this clip? Veronica was the one giving my dad the medicine? What the hell is she doing?" I smirked. I didn't say anything about Veronica. I only said that's part of the truth. Part? What do you mean? What else did she do? Randall, why don't you think about it yourself? I don't want to interfere in marital matters. That last sentence, I emphasized it deliberately. I heard him breathing hard, things slamming in the background. He was spiraling. I knew his mind was racing through every worst-case scenario, that Veronica had tricked him, that she was more involved in his father's death than he thought, that she had hidden something from him. Breaking apart a toxic alliance doesn't require much, just one tiny, well-placed knife. And I had struck precisely. By noon, Eleanor called me, excitement in her voice. Mary, you did it. Randall and Veronica are fighting outside.
Half the neighborhood is watching.
I leaned back, closed my eyes, savoring the moment like a warm cup of tea on a rainy day. Tell me everything, I said calmly. Eleanor tried, and failed, to hold back her laughter. Randall shouted, "Why were you giving my dad his medication? What else are you hiding from me?" Veronica yelled back, "What are you talking about? You were the one doing that, not me." And then Randall screamed, "Mary sent me the clip. Why are you standing there like that, Veronica?" I could see it all, every detail, as if I were standing right there. Veronica, terrified because she didn't know what I had sent. Randall, unraveling because he thought he'd been betrayed. Jealousy, suspicion, fear of exposure, all ripping through the flimsy armor of their fake unity. Eleanor finished with a line that made me laugh softly. "Mary, you cracked their marriage like shattered glass." By late afternoon, Randall messaged me again. A long, frantic paragraph. "How long has Veronica been hiding this from me? I don't trust her anymore. Did she want my dad dead sooner? Does she want the assets for herself? Do you know anything else? Please tell me the rest." I calmly replied, "Randall, all you need to know is this. The person next to you is not loyal to you. As for the rest, find it yourself." Nothing more. No extra clues. I wanted him to dig, to suspect, to turn against her. I wanted them to destroy each other. That evening, I watched the house, the one that once belonged to me, from a distance. Lights flickered inside, shadows moving violently. Shouting echoed out. Objects crashed, doors slammed. Then, through the still night, "You think I wanted to kill your father? I saw you holding the bottle. Explain yourself." The toxic mirror of their marriage finally cracked. I smiled, a small, quiet smile. They once threw me out, treated me like an inconvenience, left me shivering outside my own home. But now, with just one video clip, I had done something no one believed a 64-year-old woman could do. Split apart two people who thought they stood on the same side. I didn't spill a drop of blood. I didn't lay a finger on anyone. I only used the truth and the fear born from their own guilt. Randall and Veronica were destabilizing. The fracture between them would only grow wider. And when the moment came, I would push them both over the edge. This was only the first step. There was still much for me to reclaim. But that night, standing in the darkness, watching the two who'd ruined me tear into each other, I knew I had taken another step on my revenge path. A solid, decisive step. And I would keep walking until they had nothing left. The chaos inside the house that once belonged to me hadn't even settled when Harold sent a message that made my heart freeze. "Mary, I found something important. Come immediately." No explanation, no lengthy introduction, just those few words. yet enough for me to know this was the piece that could decide everything. I reached his office just before sunset. The last light of the day shone through the glass, bathing the room in a mysterious shade of red-orange. Harold stood beside his old wooden desk, wearing an expression fit for someone who had just exhumed a long-buried secret. "Mary," Harold began, his voice hoarse, "I found the secure lockbox Edward used back when he was young. The code wasn't a name or a birthday. It was your wedding anniversary." I choked up. 30 years together, and he still remembered every little thing. He even used it to protect what mattered most.
My voice trembled. "You managed to open it?"
Harold nodded and pushed the small lockbox toward me. It was smaller than I expected, the paint chipped in places, but the lock was still sturdy, like the man who once safeguarded it. I looked down at my hands, these thin, aged fingers of a 64-year-old woman who had endured too much loss. Then I placed them on the lid, inhaled deeply, and opened it. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed carefully with red wax. On it was handwriting I knew by heart, my husband's. "For my wife, Mary." Just 5 words, but they nearly brought me to my knees. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first sheet slid out, and my vision blurred instantly. It was the real will. Not the version Randall had swapped, not the version erased from the system, not the version Veronica fought to hide, but the final will my husband signed himself. His signature was shaky from illness, yet strong with the love he carried for me. And then there was the line that ripped my heart open. "All assets, properties, the house, and all accounts belong to my wife, Mary, who has cared for me all my life." My hand flew to my mouth to stop the sob that tried to escape. Tears streamed down my cheeks, not because of money, not because of property, but because of the painful, beautiful truth. My husband never abandoned me. Even when he was too weak to stand, he was protecting me. Even with death at his doorstep, he feared Randall and Veronica would mistreat me. Even in his final days, he left behind one last shield for me. Harold watched quietly, giving me the silence I needed. When I wiped my tears, he finally spoke softly. "I found the lockbox in the old storage room of his house. Edward must have known Randall would try to sabotage the will, so he hid the real one where only someone truly close to him would understand." My voice cracked. He knew Randall would do this? Harold sighed. "Edward didn't expect Randall to go this far, but he suspected trouble. That's why he asked me to prepare a backup copy. But Randall stole that one too. This is the only remaining original." I gripped the paper, feeling each fiber like the fading warmth of my husband's hands. After days of being thrown out, humiliated, treated like an inconvenience, I now held proof that I was the one he chose. I was the rightful owner. I was the lawful inheritor. Randall and Veronica could change medication. They could delete records. They could wipe the cameras. They could shove me out into the cold, but they couldn't erase this. I folded the will and placed it back into the envelope. A new feeling washed over me. Not rage, not sorrow, but a powerful, quiet certainty. "Harold," I said, my eyes no longer trembling, "we're going to use this to bring them down." Harold nodded firmly. "Yes." With this will and the camera footage, we finally have enough to corner Randall and Veronica completely. I stood. My legs were still old, but the strength inside them was nothing like before. For a moment, I felt as though my husband was standing behind me, placing his hand on my shoulder, whispering the way he used to. Don't be afraid. I'm here. I looked out the window, where the blazing sunset seemed to swallow the sky. In that moment, I knew I had officially shifted from defense to offense. No more uncertainty, no more weakness, no more trembling in the dark. I was the rightful owner, the wife he trusted, the one Edward chose. And now, I would reclaim everything that was mine. Not just the house, not just the property, but my dignity and justice for the man whose life was stolen. I wiped the last trace of tears, then smiled, the kind of smile Randall and Veronica would never forget. Your game is over. The day of the trial arrived, and the sky was gray like ash. I stood at the courthouse steps, gripping the envelope that held the real will and the USB containing the restored camera footage. The wind swept through my silver hair, but my heart was no longer cold. I had walked through the deepest pain, through betrayal, through the darkest night of my life. And today, I entered this place not as a victim, but as someone ready to close a cruel chapter. Harold walked beside me, nodding when I took a deep breath, a silent affirmation. It's time, Mary. As I stepped into the courtroom, every eye turned toward me. They saw a 64-year-old woman, small, gray-haired, but none of them could see the storm I carried inside. Up front, Randall and Veronica sat beside their attorney. Both looked exhausted from days of arguments, tension, and fear. Randall avoided my gaze. Veronica stared at me as if I were a curse she could no longer escape. I felt no satisfaction, only the quiet certainty that the time had come. The trial began. The prosecutor opened with a steady voice, laying out the accusations. The act of altering medication. The act of destroying and replacing the will. The act of evicting the lawful heir from her own home. The act of illegally seizing property. Each statement fell like a hammer onto Randall and Veronica. I sat silently, calmly. No need to scream. No need to cry. The truth itself was enough to crush every excuse they had. Randall's lawyer attempted a defense. My client had no knowledge of any medication tampering. But the prosecutor immediately presented the USB. The footage appeared on the large courtroom screen. Silence fell across the room. Randall appeared on video holding the pill bottle. Veronica stood beside him. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Just a few more days. Veronica went pale, tears spilling. Randall broke into a sweat, head bowing low. Gas rippled through the room. Some people covered their mouths, others exhaled sharply. I remained straight-backed, hands folded, face utterly composed. Then Harold presented the real will. His voice was firm and clear. This is Edward's final will, written and signed while fully aware and mindful. He leaves all assets to his lawful wife, Mrs. Mary. The judge examined every page, every signature, every old wax seal. He tapped his gavel lightly. Randall sprang to his feet. No, impossible. My father would leave everything to me. I'm his biological son. The judge lifted his eyes, cold and sharp. According to the will, Mr. Edward chose his wife as the sole heir. And as for you, your unauthorized access and document tampering constitute criminal acts. Randall froze. His entire body trembled. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Veronica broke into sobs, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for this. I only did what Randall told me. Her excuses faded when the prosecutor presented even more evidence. Every defense they attempted only made the room heavier. I still said nothing. There was no need. The truth spoke loudly enough. Finally, the judge looked at all of us and declared, "Based on the verified evidence, this court recognizes Mrs. Mary as the sole legal owner of all property belonging to the late Edward." I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, not because I won, but because I knew, somewhere, my husband had finally been given justice. The judge continued, voice stern. "Regarding the tampering of medication, alteration of medical records, and destruction of property, the court hereby initiates criminal prosecution against Randall and Veronica." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Randall collapsed into his chair. His head dropped into his hands as though life had drained from him. The chair shook beneath his weight.
Veronica cried hysterically, hands trembling. "Randall, do something! Say something!" But he no longer looked at her. Their toxic bond snapped forever. When the judge adjourned the session, I stood. My steps were firmer, infinitely firmer, than the day they threw me out of my home. As I passed Randall, he looked up, his eyes filled with despair, panic, and the ruin of a life he thought he controlled. I paused for 1 second, looked at him, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with the calm of someone who had walked through hell and finally stepped into the light. In a quiet voice meant only for him, I said, "This isn't revenge, Randall. This is the end. And justice." I turned away, never looking back. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind me, leaving behind the dark past I had fought through for so long. I did not win because I was strong. I won because I was right. And because my husband had never abandoned me. That day, I walked out of the courthouse not as a victim, but as a woman who reclaimed her life. After the trial, I didn't go home immediately. I stood in the courthouse courtyard, watching the stream of people passing by, letting the late season wind sweep through my silver hair. Inside me, there was no more chaos, no more resentment, only a vast silence, wide and still like a lake after a storm. I had reclaimed justice. I had restored my dignity. I had paid back the debt Randall and Veronica forced upon my life, and my husband's. But the next step was to return to the place that once meant everything. That afternoon, Harold drove me to the gate of my old home, the house I had only dared to look at from across the street, the house where I was thrown out like something worthless, and now, the house I returned to as its rightful owner. The iron gate stood silent. No shouting, no slamming, no chaos inside. No Randall, no Veronica. They had already been taken in for investigation. I placed my hand on the gate, the same cold metal as before, but today it no longer made me shiver. "I'm home." The gate opened quietly, as if it had been waiting for me. As I stepped into the yard, memories surged back. More than 30 years. Every brick, every flower I planted appeared vividly in my mind. My husband once sat in that wooden chair every morning. I once welcomed him home from business trips at this very doorway. Every corner of this yard held the imprint of our lives. I walked slowly, letting my heart reconnect with what was once ours. When I opened the front door, the familiar scent of old wood washed over me, a scent I thought I would never breathe in again. I stood in the living room and looked up at our wedding photo on the wall. I couldn't help but smile softly. "My love, I finally protected what belonged to us." I whispered it gently, as though he were standing right beside me. And in that moment, I felt him listening. I headed toward the bedroom, but as I passed my husband's study,
something made me stop. The door was slightly ajar. No one had used that room since he passed. I used to fear stepping inside because the memories were too vivid, too painful. Today, I opened the door. In the dim room where the afternoon sunlight slipped through a thin crack, I saw his familiar desk, his old books, and the chair where he used to sit reviewing documents. Everything was still there. But then I noticed an envelope placed neatly on the desk. Old, dust-covered, but on the front was a line of text. My name, Mary, written in my husband's handwriting. I stood frozen before the envelope. A strange foreboding tingled down my spine. I reached out. Dust rose from the surface, and my heart clenched at the familiar touch of his handwriting, his careful folds. I opened the envelope. Inside, there was only a single sheet of paper. Not a will, not documents,
But a letter,
just a few lines that took my breath away. I read slowly, each word piercing deeper. Mary, if you have found this letter, it means things have unfolded exactly the way I feared. I stopped. My heart pounded. I know Randall is not well. I know he may do something foolish because of Veronica. My tears fell, but my hands held the paper tightly, afraid to let go. But there is something I never told you. Randall is not my biological son. I felt as if lightning struck through me. My legs staggered back, hitting the edge of the desk. Not his son? I kept reading through blurred vision. I adopted him when he was very young. His real mother was a woman with too many secrets, and I fear those secrets will return. I stood completely still. Every sentence opened another door, a door into a past I had never been allowed to touch. Mary, if Randall becomes dangerous, you must find the second letter. It will tell you everything about Veronica and Randall's true family. The letter slipped from my fingers and fell onto the desk. My heart hammered so hard it felt as though it would break free from my chest. There was a second letter? What other secrets? What connection tied Randall, Veronica, and that mysterious woman together? Could it all relate to my husband's death? I drew in a deep breath, but calm would not come. My husband, all these years, kept this from me? Not because he didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect me from a truth darker than Randall's crimes. I lifted my head. The last rays of the setting sun slipped through the window, landing on the desk where the letter lay. I whispered, "My love, where do I find the second letter?" No answer, only the wind blowing through the crack in the door, carrying with it a whisper of fate. The revenge was not over. The secrets were not yet revealed, and I had more to uncover. I picked up the letter and pressed it to my chest. Inside me was not only sorrow, but a sharp, familiar determination. I had stepped into a new chapter, one where Randall and Veronica were only the surface, one where my husband's past would lead me to a truth far more terrifying. I stood, closed the study door, and in the fading light I understood. A new door had opened, and I, a 64-year-old woman, would walk through it without fear, without hesitation, without forgiveness. This story of revenge, mystery, and family was only just beginning.